Hannah and Connor, this movie is about my recent trip to Montana with several friends. It is a souvenir of my trip, made especially for you. It begins when we boarded the plane in New Orleans and went northwest almost as far as you can go to the border between the United States and Canada. This is Montana. The landscape is spectacular at every turn. You don't have to leave the United States to see beautiful landscapes. We started in northern Montana at Glacier National Park, then went up into Alberta, Canada into Waterton National Park, then drove all day Wednesday to get to Prairie, Montana, which is near the southern border and also near Yellowstone National Park. The photos in this movie, which the Apple Store helped me make just for you, are in that order. This is Glacier Park Lodge, where my friends and I stayed for 3 days. This is the main lodge where the other three friends stayed. And this is the West Wing, where my room was. See that white SUV in the lower corner? It's pointing at my room. Each day, we took field trips and explored different areas of northern Montana. Just to the east of our lodge was the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, which covers 1.5 million acres of ruggedly spectacular scenery, bordered on the west by the Glacier National Park and on the north by the Canadian border. 10,000 Blackfeet Indians live on the reservation. Have you studied in school yet about the part of our history when pioneers were discovering the Wild West and Indians were being confined to reservations? Well, there are 7 Indian reservations in Montana. In fact, a huge part of Montana is composed of national parks and Indian reservations. The parks are, of course, owned by the federal government, and the reservations, well, by the various Indian tribes. The Blackfeet and Flathead reservations are in northern Montana, and the Chippewa, Cheyenne, and Crow Indians live in the southern part. The smallest reservation, where the Chippewa live, still has over 130,000 acres of land. Imagine all that land. Not many people, not many cars on the road, just a lot of mountains and pastures where, like the song says, the buffalo still roam and the deer and the antelope play. The first day was a Saturday. We drove through Glacier National Park just to take in the scenery. It was 33 degrees, and we all had on turtlenecks and jackets. I think it was 96 degrees that day in Baton Rouge. Not sure what it was in watercolor, but surely not as hot as Baton Rouge or as cold as Montana. These photos are of Lake St. Mary, which is the second largest lake in the park. Seeing these clouds, you can almost feel how cold it was. This is Manny Glacier Lodge, where we stopped for lunch. People come here who want to see glaciers. I always thought glaciers were only in the ocean, but that's not true. Those, I guess, are icebergs, like the one that sank the Titanic. A glacier, I learned, is an ice structure that is at least 25 acres across and doesn't melt, no matter how hot it gets in the summer. I also learned that of the 150 glaciers that were once in Montana, only about 25 are left. You'll see remnants of some of these, that means what's left of them, in some of these photos, and we saw some from the window in the dining room of the lodge. Bison chili was on the menu, so of course we had to try that. Bison is another word for buffalo. It was delicious. I understand you can now buy buffalo meat at Whole Foods, and that it's actually healthier than the beef we usually eat at home, and that local restaurants are starting to serve it. Ask Dad if he's serving buffalo at any of his restaurants. These next 3 photos are of a beautiful lake and the mountains and hiking trails around it. Can you see that little bit of snow still on the mountain behind the lake? I know you probably don't think of your grandmother as a hiker, but we hiked every day. This trail we hiked went all the way around the lake, and at the end of that day, we figured we had hiked 12 miles. And I don't think there could be a prettier place to hike anywhere. It was gorgeous. There's a famous highway in Glacier National Park called Going to the Sun Highway, and it goes through the most beautiful places I've ever seen. No wonder everyone back at the lodge kept asking, "Have you been on Going to the Sun Road yet?" It's definitely a must-see for anyone going to Montana for the first time. So Sunday, after church, that's where we headed. Along the road, we saw all sorts of animal life. See these horses? We think they were wild horses, and they were in the middle of the road. We had to wait for them to cross. There's an open range law in Montana, which means nobody has to fence in their animals, so it's impossible to know for sure if the animals you see are wild or owned by somebody. But the only people who own land in the park or who live there are families whose grandparents owned the land when the park was created in 1910 and were grandfathered in. Ask Mom and Dad what that means. This is another view of Lake St. Mary. We passed it going and coming. These next photos are views we saw from Going to the Sun Road. And remember, no matter what kind of camera you use or how good a photographer you are, no camera can ever capture all of the beauty that nature has bestowed. So if you think this is beautiful, the real thing is probably twice as beautiful. And by the way, all of these pictures in this movie I took with the iPad y'all gave me for Christmas. See these gray-colored trees in the foreground? That's from a forest fire that happened a few years ago. In Montana, the Park Service doesn't clean up from a forest fire. They let Mother Nature take care of its own. So eventually, these dead tree trunks will fall over, rot, and become mulch to nurture new trees. They have a huge respect in Montana for the power of nature, and I just love that. Here, we're headed up the mountain on Going to the Sun Road, and you can see one of the few man-made structures in the park. I guess they felt they had to have something there to keep cars from going off the cliff. See the trail to the right of this stream? That's one of the trails we hiked. Along the trail, I took pictures of strange-looking plants that we don't see in Louisiana. These tall, funny-looking white plants are called beargrass. These tall plants have velvety, soft leaves and are called by the local people who live there Indian toilet paper. Okay, I can almost hear you giggling, but that's really what they're called. I'm guessing the Indians may have named it, and you can probably guess why. This is the top of the plant, and the flowers look a little bit like our snapdragons, I think. I don't know what these are, but they're in the middle of nowhere and just prove that Mother Nature doesn't need help from us or an audience to create beauty. You can see what's left of a glacier high on this mountain. I can't imagine more beautiful landscapes anywhere in the world. Rocky and rugged in some places, lush and green in others. See the glacier on the mountain in the back of this photo? And what's left of one in the front on this closer mountain? On Monday, we traveled through northern Montana on our way to Canada, but stopped at pretty spots along the way. Like this beautiful stream with several waterfalls along its path. And this huge lake near the border of Canada and the United States. Since Canada is a different country, we had to use our passports to get in. You probably had to do that too when you went to Italy. This was a strange-looking mountain just over the border of Canada, so of course I had to take its picture. And look what was just around the bend on the other side. I couldn't resist taking this video.
Taking the whole thing?
This is the Prince of Wales Hotel, where people from England, all over the world for that matter, stay when they visit Alberta, Canada. An interesting thing I learned about Canada is that instead of states like Florida and Louisiana in our country, Canada is divided into provinces, 10 of them. Alberta is one of those provinces. I also learned that Canada is the second largest country in the world as far as how much land it takes up. See if you can find Canada on a map, and then see if you can find Alberta, and even some of the other provinces. I tell you what, let's play a globe game. I'll call you in a few days to see if you know some of the other names of Canada's provinces. I'll even send you $1 for every one you can tell me. I guess I'll have to disguise it somehow because you're really not supposed to send dollars through the mail. Anyway, back to the Prince of Wales Hotel. They stayed booked years in advance, so we stayed just across this waterway at the Crandall Mountain Lodge. We did enjoy dinner there one night, though. We stayed in Canada 2 days, then headed south again for southern Montana. It took all day Wednesday to drive there, probably about the same amount of time it takes you to get from Baton Rouge to Watercolor. Along the way, we ate our lunch on picnic tables overlooking this waterfall, the chipmunks scampering for our crumbs. These are three of my friends on the trip, Mr. Merle and Mr. and Ms. Price, and here I am with two of them. Back in southern Montana on Thursday, we decided to just hang out around the house and rest from all that driving the day before. Of the 6 friends in our group, 3 of them own this log cabin together not far from Yellowstone National Park, so that's where we stayed. It's called the Townsend House because it was the home of Dr. Townsend, the local doctor at Chico Hot Springs Spa and Resort just down the road. Everyone in the area seemed to know where the Townsend House was. It wasn't a small cabin. It had 3 stories, including the basement, a large kitchen, big family room with huge fireplace, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a big front porch where we spent a lot of time telling stories and laughing. I had a little room upstairs all to myself with twin beds end to end. The head of one of the beds was right next to a window, so I picked that one and slept with the window open and the breezes blowing in on me all night long. In fact, you can see my window just above the green roof. There are lots of trails near the log cabin, and we did hike up one of them. We hiked up so high that it got really cold. So cold that the leaves on the trees had already started changing colors. See this yellow tree? A month ago it was bright green. Autumn comes earlier in the Northwest than in Louisiana or Florida. On Friday, we took a field trip to a nearby lake to hike the trails there. This trail goes completely around the lake. Several hikers coming in from their hikes said they had seen a mother bear with 2 cubs, but we didn't see them. I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. I wanted to see a bear, but it was a little scary since bears can be really dangerous, especially grizzly bears, and I can't tell the difference between a grizzly bear and a black bear. The park rangers kept reminding hikers to take along their bear spray when hiking deep in the woods, and I thought they were joking. Bear spray? How can a can of spray stop a bear? A wasp or a hornet maybe, but a bear? We kept seeing these little red things along the trail and decided they looked like raspberries. Well, we were in the spirit of nature, so we tried some. Nobody got sick, so I guess they were raspberries. Back at the cabin that night, while we were cooking supper, we had a really interesting visitor. We had noticed the apple tree behind the house, but the apples were so high up we couldn't reach them. Well, this bear came down the mountain from behind the house to get those apples. The bear, who was at least 8 feet tall when he stood on his hind legs, climbed that little bitty apple tree and proceeded to bounce up and down, shaking at least 4 dozen apples from the tree. It was raining apples. Then he came down the tree and began to eat those apples one by one. We were all in the dining room, peering out at him, fascinated at how close he came to us. Fortunately, he was not interested in us, but in those golden, delicious apples. Somebody in our group got so brave at one point that they began tapping on the window to get his attention, and the bear just looked at us as if to say, "Please leave me alone. I'm busy." Can't a bear even enjoy a meal around here? Who is doing that tapping? Later, someone told us that that bear could have come right through that glass window, and I suppose he could have. But fortunately, he had plenty of apples to keep him busy and didn't have to snack on, well, us. We'd be hard-pressed to find that much excitement again during our trip. That bear was definitely the highlight of our trip. But with a day or two of rest under our belts and Yellowstone National Park just a few miles away, we headed south on Saturday to spend a day in the park. I'd heard of Yellowstone National Park all my life, but had never been there. There are lots of wild animals in the park, and if they happen to be in the middle of the road, tourists are supposed to give them right of way. It is their park. I like that. This buffalo was meandering down the middle of the road, so I just rolled down the window, whispered, "Can I take your picture?" and clicked. He didn't seem to mind at all. We also saw elk, antelopes, mountain goats, hawks, and lots of deer. I would have photographed them all, but you're not supposed to intrude on the animals' habitat or approach them anywhere in the park. It's their home. I learned that the park is 60 miles across, and you can't possibly see it all in a day. I also learned that most of the land in the park was formed from a volcano that erupted millions of years ago and is called a caldera. Now, there's a vocabulary word for you. You might share that with your teachers. It will erupt again one day, and I really feel sorry for the animals when that happens. If you get close enough to the mountain wall to actually touch it, you can see where the lava ran down the mountain and then solidified. One of the most exciting things we did in the park was to go see Old Faithful. Old Faithful is a geyser which erupts about every hour and a half with regularity. Why do you think they call it Old Faithful? I took a video so you can actually see it erupt. When it does, it pours over 8,000 gallons of boiling water into the air, so you can't get too close. Thousands of people travel hundreds of miles to see the eruptions, but have to stand way back so they don't get burned. You can see visitors here in the video from all over the world waiting for Old Faithful to erupt. Back at the cabin, we had more wildlife excitement. The next morning, we were having coffee. I looked through the screen window, and there was a deer looking right back at me. See her outline through the screen and the trees? Not far behind was her fawn. I guess they learned that we weren't going to hurt them because every morning from then on, we would be visited by deer, sometimes 5 or 6 at a time. See this baby deer? Isn't he cute? On Monday, we drove up to Beartooth Parkway, another road that's famous for its scenic views. It's not in Yellowstone, but just east in the state of Wyoming. The main difference in Beartooth Parkway and going to the Sun Highway is that on Beartooth Parkway, you actually look down on the mountain peaks instead of up. It was so cold up there, the snow hadn't melted from last winter. See how you can look down at these mountains? Of course, you had to be on a higher mountain to do that. And we were. In fact, we were over 10,000 feet high above sea level. And sea level is, of course, well, where you are in watercolor. These are the 3 people that own the log cabin where we stayed. Mr. Burrell in back and Beverly and Dudley Coates in front of him. Tuesday, our last day, we hiked up Big Creek, and that's our trip.